Let's talk a little bit about violence. That's a segue. The problem in, I think, humanity is that violence oftentimes works. It gets the results that are attempting to be gotten. And violence has been that way as long as probably human beings have been around. You know, if you're a reader of the Bible, it's not too long before Adam and Eve's own kids go crazy, right? And so murder erupts into the universe in Genesis pretty fast. So the problem is, though, is that it oftentimes works. It oftentimes creates fear. It oftentimes intimidates. It provides successes in ways that aren't usually what I would call human, like it's almost inhumane oftentimes the way, but it works. And Jesus obviously understood that thought. Growing up in the Roman Empire, which was, if you know much about the Roman Empire, they were a large empire that dominated most of the known world with, believe it or not, violence. And it was a violent society. Prior to Jesus, though, even in the Old Testament, full of violence. As humanity navigated a culture where violence was almost required to even exist. And if you really read the Old Testament, although, yes, oftentimes Israel participated in violence, there was effort through the work of Father to make a new culture that didn't celebrate, embrace, and hold violence as a way of life. Yes, they still were very violent. Please don't hear what I'm saying as if the Old Testament people were not violent. They were. But there was a change and a shift where you saw some things like violence towards women or violence towards children was changing, because that was an even more violent era of human history. After Jesus came on the scene, Christianity has had an extremely complicated relationship with violence through many different parts of our history. Not too long ago, even Christianity has struggled with violence. They've used violence to oppose disbelievers. If you know the story of the guy that first translated the Bible into English, he was burned at the stake. So there's a lot of violence that went on throughout our history, even in Christianity. And Christ himself warned Peter, those who live by the sword tend to die by the sword. Now, violence that's most destructive is usually acts of violence, physical harm intended to hurt, damage, or kill. But that's not the only avenue that violence rears itself in our world and in our lives. Most of our families, our neighborhoods, our schools, workplaces, restaurants, even our churches, even on our roads, you road rage people. You know, violence is very common. Feelings of violence, thoughts of violence, words of violence. So here we are in 2025, living in this society where anger and anxiety are falling on us all the time. Just like a gentle, slow snowfall that goes on and on and on. And you don't even realize how deep it is until you take like a step outside and you're like, oh, dang, there's a lot. And the more that piles up, it seems at any moment we can be overwhelmed and push ourselves into the edge, over the edge. And I really, as I was asking the Lord what to say today, and whether or not he told me or I just felt in my heart what he was speaking, the thing I really wanted to say to our church is, thank you for being a people who do not give in to that. Like, I hope you hear that from me. Like, receive that. Thank you for being a church that is not giving in to the violent nature. Like, that's really awesome. And it's evidence of the kind of people that God continues to pull together. And we're not the only church, obviously, like ours. There's a lot. And thank you for that. But what was Jesus' response to violence? Well, I don't know if we're called, this is the one time I would say that if you wear the What Would Jesus Do bracelet, probably not want to do a what would Jesus do when it comes to how his response to violence was. Because Jesus' response to violence was to absorb it. He saw a higher restorative justice clothed in this promise of Father's peace. I cannot argue that we should all be absorbers of violence. That seems to be an extremely hard road to walk out. So do not hear me say today that if you want to be Christian, you should absorb all the violence around you. If you have a wife and children, you probably should not be absorbing violence, okay? You should probably have a different calling. In John chapter 14, verse 27, Jesus says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not let them be afraid." The kind of peace that the world gives us is a peace where there's a time where there is no trouble. Father's peace is around us in the midst of our troubles and stays through the hard and the easy. That's why the peace of God and the peace of Christ is so much more helpful to us as Christians than just having a peaceful life, because it's with us all the time. And it kind of feels like right now in our society and culture, the peaceful times are few and far between, and okay, we get it. It's where we're at. I'm not going to get all bent out of shape about it, because I have the Father's peace in my heart, which is with me whether it's hard or whether it's easy. It's here. Doesn't mean I still don't have feelings and thoughts. I do, sure, but I have the Father's peace as well. Jesus' response, he does not require vindication. All the vindication that Jesus needed, the clearing of blame, he received in the package of Father's love. In Matthew chapter 18, verse 12 to 14, listen to what he says. "What do you think? If a shepherd has 100 sheep and one of them has gone astray, does he not leave the 99 on the mountains and go in search of the one that went astray? And if he finds it, truly I tell you, he rejoices over it more than over the 99 that never went astray. So it is not the will of your Father in heaven that one of these little ones should be lost." Father is willing to leave the whole group to go find the one lost one. Most would place blame on the one who ran away as the victim of their choices, but not our Father. He's always seeking those who are lost. Jesus' response, would he have any use for revenge? No. While Jesus is enjoying the ecstasy of joy only found in the presence of Father, listen to this, John 15, chapter 15, verse 10 and 11. "If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. I have said these things to you so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete." As faithful Christians, our responsibility may not be to absorb violence, but we do have a responsibility not to add to it. Now, this isn't today's message. This is just what the Lord put on my heart for you. Please consider it. If you're feeling a lot of anger and fear or shame or anxiety, my suggestion, set your phone down, turn off your screens, turn off the feeds, move towards the people that you love or love you. Hug them, hold them, encourage them, and you'll find some of that in return. And consider that the next generation is watching us and is picking up all the little tidbits as we navigate this journey, all the light and the love and the life that we live for Jesus Christ. They're catching all of it as we choose to navigate this. So consider that. That was Doug's deep thought of the day. Amen? Okay, amen. So let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. You didn't have to applaud, but that's nice, thank you. The bread of life. So I've been on a journey. I'm 44 years old. I'll be 45 in 2 months, 3 months. And I first started following the Lord kind of back when I was 17-ish or so. And, been a part of this church the whole time. So it's been, this has been my deal, my road. And on this journey, obviously, I've had lots of different things go on, and I've learned a lot. And there's always been this concept of like this life verse that people have, and I've kind of like always thought that was kind of a funny thing. But at the same time, as I've gotten older, I've kind of, you kind of get things as you get older. When you're young, you're like hip and cool and all like, rebel-like, yeah, I'm not going to be like those old Christian people and their stupid life verses. And you're like in your 40s, you're like, oh, dang, I need a life verse because my life is hard. It happens, trust me. Amen. And one of the verses that has just captured my heart is in John chapter 7, and I'm not going to read it right now. I'm going to leave you in holding. But I want to give you some context about this verse and why it has meant a lot to me over this last season. And in John, all of John, the book of John, which is one of the Gospels, John writes a lot about things like bread and water and light and darkness. It's a big part of the theme. And in the book of John, he also covers the feeding of the 5,000 in John chapter 6. A lot of you have heard this and are familiar with the story. If you're not, I understand. Not everybody has read this part of the Bible. All four of the Gospels talk about when there was a bunch of people, between 5 and 20,000 some people, all sitting together listening to Jesus preach, and they were hungry. And the disciples were like, hey, Jesus, people are getting hangry. People are looking at us sideways. I think they might try to stone you because, again, violence was a part of their culture. I don't think they were going to stone him, but I'm being dramatic. And so anyway, food became a serious issue for the people, and they wanted to feed them. They felt bad. I'm sure many of the people there didn't eat a lot, and so they needed food. And Jesus performed this incredible miracle where 20,000 people all get fed, and there's even leftovers afterwards, and there's this really awesome thing that happens. And in John chapter 6, it's interesting because right after this huge miracle goes on, Jesus keeps on preaching, keeps on talking. And it's almost like sometimes, I wonder if the disciples were like, we probably should have taken the mic away from him after he did the miracle, because he kind of talked himself out of this incredible sign of how good he was. Because what happens is he starts telling everybody, you all are just following me because I feed you. You're just hungry for food. You don't really realize who I am that's standing in front of you. The real promise of all history standing here. You want another sign to prove that God is real, that I am from Father, yet I am standing in front of you, and yet you still want more. It's not enough. It's not enough. And he keeps talking. And he talks about people have to eat his flesh and drink his blood in order to, and as odd as that sounds, it's like zombie Jesus. Like, what are you talking about? We have to eat. We have to eat your flesh, drink your blood. Why? Are we vampires, God? And then a bunch of people leave because the saying is hard. Because he's kind of like telling them, all you want is the miracles, and you don't want the actual miracle that's right here. All you want is my provision. All you want is for me to make your life a little bit easier, but you don't even really recognize that it's me. I'm right here. So a lot of them leave. The crowd kind of disperses. And then the people closer to Jesus start leaving. Things get a little harder. And then in this incredibly vulnerable moment that John writes beautifully in his chapter 6, he turns to the disciples and says, are you guys going to leave too? The 12. And it's a very, you can kind of, it's the one time when I'm reading what Jesus says that there's almost, in coming out of him, there is almost a little bit of sorrow in the way that's worded. So are you going to leave too? There's almost I don't know, it's so fascinating to me to hear those little moments of Christ. And the disciples, Peter responds and says, where else would we go? You're it. And then we come to John chapter 7. So there's a little bit of context of this sort of has happened right before this. And Jesus, this whole time, wants the people listening to him, and he also wants the same for all of you and for me, to catch that the miracle is Christ himself. The sign is Christ himself. My concern, and I think others would say the same, I think there's a shift that's happened in the last however many years, decades, that we really would prefer deliverance from our circumstances, oftentimes, over the physical presence of our Savior. We would rather life be easier as a Christian than actually be in the presence of Christ. That we would rather have the bread, the water, the light of God, but not really be with him. So in John chapter 7, let's read a little bit together what happens. Verse 1. If you have a Bible, you can turn to it, or your phone, or it'll be up here. Everybody okay? You don't seem okay. You mean me to come out and hug you? I will hug you guys right now. Literally every person in this room if I have to. And it'll wear me out, and I'll be tired for a month. But I'll do it. All right, John chapter 7. Verse 1. After this, Jesus went about in Galilee. After this being after all that stuff I just said happened. Just don't forget, okay? He did not wish to go about in Judea because the Jews were looking for an opportunity to kill him. Now, the Jewish festival of booths, or tabernacle, was near. So his brothers said to him, "Leave here and go to Judea, so that your disciples also may see the works you are doing. For no one who wants to be widely known acts in secret. If you do these things, show yourself to the world." And then we have this little parenthesis from John. For not even his brothers believed in him. Now let's pause and reflect. Some of you have had siblings. For some of you, it's not a surprise that the brothers didn't believe in Jesus, because for some of you, your siblings didn't like you, didn't like anybody. That might be true. For some of you, it might be a very big surprise, because your experience with siblings have been that you guys are closer than anybody else on the planet. Your siblings generally have the most DNA that's like yours out of anybody on earth. A lot of times they're very much like you, but sometimes they're not. But I find this so fascinating that John even includes this little parenthesis here. That Jesus' brothers, his own brothers, don't get him. Why? And not only do they not get him, Jesus is concerned right now in this, based on what John says, that if he goes to this place they're telling him to go, that people are there wanting to murder him. And his brothers are saying, you know, you're kind of small potatoes around here. You just did this big miracle, and then you talked yourself out of it, and everybody left you. You need to go to a place where there's more people so that you can do these miracles so that more people will believe in you and see that you really are God, despite the fact that it might cost you your life. Almost saying, you're better off just going off, and if you die, you die. At least you'll be famous, because right now, what you're doing in this little small podunk place of Galilee is wasting your time. That's his brothers. Men, or maybe sisters in there too. Sometimes the Bible didn't include women because it had a problem sometimes with women. Not all the time, just sometimes. So it could have been sisters there too. These are people that grew up with him. These are people that watched him as a toddler trip and fall and cry and run to mom. These are people that sat with their mom, his mom, who probably told the story of Jesus' miraculous birth, their flight to get to the manger, to have this child, and what the wise men showed up and gave these gifts. And it's why we even have any money at all, is because these guys showed up because of your brother's birth. And there was this miraculous thing. And there was a huge, a bunch of other kids his age were all murdered during this time because they were so worried about this. They grew up next to him, next to hearing their mom say that. They had a relationship with him. They probably had Jesus' undivided attention, eye to eye, face to face. having a conversation, out in the fields, working in carpentry. They probably saw him make his first bowl, as warped and uneven as it might have been. I don't know. Jesus may not, maybe he was a perfect carpenter when he was 2 years old, but my guess is he had to learn like the rest of us. He was a human being. They probably heard him talk about his purpose, why God sent him, face to face, day after day. And yet, they didn't believe him. How could someone so close to Christ, having watched all of that, still be completely in the dark about who he was? Well, it kind of makes sense why sometimes people in the church who are so close to Christ seem to be completely in the dark about who he is. Now, darkness oftentimes makes us think evil. I would argue that more often than not, darkness like that, the brothers, I don't think that they were evil, just like I don't think people in the church that don't really exhibit the character of God are evil. But they are in darkness. They don't see the light. They're not aware. It's clouded. It's like they're not aware of who Christ is. How do you not know who he is when he grew up in your home? I think so often in darkness, we exchange Christ for earthly things. We lift up personalities and theologies. We navigate our lives through things like hatred, shame, or dishonor, and those things are sometimes very evil. Sometimes in darkness, though, we can lead ourselves to a place of success. Sometimes darkness can take us to a place where we have a lot of money, or a lot of power, or a lot of fame. It doesn't necessarily mean that they were evil, but that means that they were clouded in what was most important. We can find that distractions keep us from Father's will, and darkness can sort of creep in, and we suddenly don't realize where we are, what we're doing when we're spending so much time separate from God. Even in churches, we can elevate a legal, moral idea that the way we are, how pious we are, or how spiritual we are, and we can orient ourselves around those beliefs to keep us safe and comfortable, but are actually in total opposition to what Father is about. This is where I think the idea of darkness, even the brothers at this moment, are in darkness. Similar to how the Pharisees saw all the signs, but yet wouldn't believe. Similar to how the crowds who saw all the signs were still thinking they wanted more, that the bread wasn't enough. Can you really show me, God, that you're really going to change my life? If it was really true, if you were really who you were, wouldn't my life be better right now? Wouldn't I have more right now? Wouldn't I feel good about what I'm doing right now? Wouldn't I be more settled? Wouldn't I be more comfortable? All the time, begging God to show us, and he stands right in our midst, as close to you as he could ever get. Here I am. Here I am. Jesus' brothers, they weren't evil. They were in delusion. They knew him better than probably you do. Darkness was definitely around them, but in the sense that they were delusional about what Jesus was supposed to do. It strikes me as a uniquely odd situation for Jesus to be in. His own brothers. Probably had some anger, probably some resentment for who Jesus was, confused, maybe some fear, maybe shame, seeming so far. I think sometimes we can mistakenly label behaviors as if we're in faith, searching for an answer from God, when in reality it's just the darkness. And that the light is right before us, but yet all we can see is that until this thing changes, I can't believe that God is real. or that God really loves me. As we continue in John chapter 7. So his brothers are his brothers. We're jumping ahead just a few verses to verse 10. But after his brothers had gone to the festival, then he also went, not publicly, but, as it were, in secret. The Jews were looking for him at the festival and saying, "Where is he?" And there was considerable complaining about him among the crowds. Let's pause for a second. What is this festival that he was going to? The Festival of Booths, the Festival of Tabernacles. It's kind of like a big vacation party, pilgrimage. It's a celebration of God delivering Egypt through the wilderness, as most of the festivals were about, right? And Moses leading the people through Exodus. If you've ever seen the movie, you know, the pillar of light goes before them, and sometimes there's a lot of cool things that happen, and the manna comes down, and they eat the manna, and then he hits the rock with the stick, and the water pours out, right? There's all these cool things that happen during this time, and so there's a lot of festivals around this idea. And so during the Festival of Booths, or Tabernacles, they all would come to Jerusalem, Judea together, and they would set up these tents, and they would kind of pretend like, hey, we're camping again, we're roughing it, we're out here. There's not a lot of, you know, there's food, water, but it's probably sparing, not a lot of it. And they would hang out for 7 days. They would do some cool festival stuff in the churches where they would like take a cup of water and like walk around the altar and be like, hey, we're celebrating. Remember when Moses struck the rock? Yay, water, right? Like there was all these little things that they did. It was kind of like a vacation, kind of supposed to be a big deal. You were sort of required to go if you were Jewish during this time to these festivals. It was kind of like if you don't go, you must not be really Jewish, must not really believe in God. So I like to call it as sort of a vacation for Christ, that he was going where a bunch of people were already complaining about him. We're used to vacations where we go and the kids we bring along complain about what we're not doing. Jesus gets to go on vacation to a place where the people are complaining about him. Sounds like a fun vacation. And so he goes to this place to be there, but he goes in secret, probably because his brothers, he didn't want to go with them because obviously their attitude was not the kind of attitude that he was wanting to travel with. Anybody ever been on a trip with people who have an attitude that you don't want to travel with? 2 of you. Wow. Okay. I'm going to stay focused. Let's just say there's been some youth trips in the past that I've learned my lesson. No, it's not. Never my fault. So Jesus is showing up to considerable complaining about him among the crowds. Going on in verse 12. While some were saying he's a good man, others are saying, no, he's deceiving the crowd. Verse 13, no one would speak openly about him for fear of the Jews, the death threats. There's a lot about that, but we're not going to get sidetracked. Verse 14, about the middle of the festival, Jesus goes up into the temple and began to teach. The Jews were astonished at it, saying, how does this man have such learning? When has he never been taught? Then Jesus answered them, my teaching is not mine, but his who sent me. Anyone who resolves to do the will of God will know whether the teaching is from God or whether I am speaking on my own. Those who speak on their own seek their own glory, but the one who seeks the glory of him who sent me is true, and there is nothing unjust in him. Did not Moses give you the law, yet none of you keeps the law? Why are you looking for an opportunity to kill me? The crowd answered, you have a demon. Who is trying to kill you? So let's dig in a little deeper here. The Feast of Tabernacles, this thing that they're trying to celebrate. It's 5 days after the 1 day a year that the priest gets to go into the holiest of holies. Hopefully you're following me. There used to be a tent that had a holy place and then an even holier place where God's presence truly resided. And the priest, once a year, could go all the way through the holy place into the holiest of holy place and be face-to-face with God for 1 day of the year. You've probably heard us every now and then allude to the fact that they used to tie a rope around the priest's leg when he would go into the holiest of holies, because if he went in there and God didn't there was some sin involved or something going on, he might die, and so they'd have to drag him back out with the rope if he was dead in there, right? Like, that's how serious this was. And that was one day a year, and this festival was happening 5 days after that. Now, that's the context of how relationship used to work with God, is that one man picked about of all of us could go and hang out with God for one day a year. One day. And here's Jesus standing up in the middle of the festival, waving his hand. Hey, guys, welcome to the holiest of the holies. And what do they say? Who taught this guy? He don't know nothing. Do we even know what school his credentials are from? Do we know what who really, advocates for him? The moment mankind is offered a face-to-face relationship with God, they say, eh. What else can you do for me? What else you got? Try to imagine any relationship in your life that you were allowed to have one day a year to be with that person. And the change that would happen if you could go from one day a year to being with that person for every hour, for every moment, as long as you ever wanted to. Don't you think you'd have a little bit of joy? Don't you think you would celebrate that? Don't you think you would show up at a festival that's called the Festival of Tabernacles, which the word tabernacle is related to the meaning of God living amongst us? Don't you think that idea might have broken through into people's minds, that there would be a realization, an aha moment, that, wow, God is here right now? What the heck are we doing sitting in these tents? What the heck are we doing watching this guy walk around with a pitcher of water and pour it out? Yay, thank you, Moses, for striking the rock. You did it, right? Like, who cares? He's here. He's right here in front of us. Darkness wants to delude us into trading the presence of God for deliverance from our circumstances. I'm going to say that again. Darkness, which darkness is literally just the absence of light. It's not a thing, it's the absence of light. Wants to delude us into trading the presence of God for deliverance from our circumstances. Oh, that's great, Jesus, that you're here, but bro, I'm hungry. That's great, Jesus, but I need help with my bills. That's great, Jesus, but I'm tired of this job. That's great, Jesus, but I don't feel real fulfilled in my family. That's great, Jesus, but I'm not feeling very validated in my life. Darkness keeps us in a deluded state, hoping that we will someday be delivered. What use is the presence of God if it ain't going to change my life? I mean, we could go back to making a tent up here, and we could open up the front so that when you guys come on Sunday, you could see the first room, and we would tell you, hey, behind that tent, one day next year, we're going to close this one. You can't watch, so we're going to close this tent. I'm going to go in there, and I'm going to meet with God, and it's going to be really cool. And then I'm going to come out, and I'm going to say, unless I die, I might die. So if I die, just please drag my body out. But if I actually come out living, maybe I'll have something really great to say to you that God said. And you guys, man, thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Like, we could go back to that way. If you really want deliverance from your circumstances over the presence of God, I think he would probably sometimes let you have that. How loving he is. But this has been, I would say, one of the most constant messages of my life that God has tried to break through my brain, is how valuable the presence of God is in the here and right now. That it's worth more than a deliverance from my circumstance. It's worth more than all my bills being paid. It's worth more than having a full tummy. It's worth more than having the whims and the whistles and the this and the that's. It's hard to say, but it's worth more than the fulfillment of even this life or whatever this life might bring me. It's worth more than the things that the earth has to provide for me. It's worth more than all that. The presence of God, just being with him in the here and now, the present presence of God. And I can't believe how often I think growing up, and maybe sometimes even still now, would be so quick to trade it for something else. And I think we all struggle with that. I think we all have a little something in us. If Jesus' brothers hear the crowd, those people that got fed all that food when there was nothing, the Pharisees studied their whole life so that they could recognize the presence of God. I mean, what did you study in school? Name it. Wouldn't you hope that you would recognize what you studied? But that was just in school. Imagine your whole life studying to recognize the presence of God, and then when it shows up, you try to kill it. Hoping in the promises that our deliverer can make while he stands in front of us. Where Jesus is, there is Father. That's God's tabernacle. The brothers don't get him. The religious leaders don't get him. The non-religious authorities of the day don't get him. Even the crowd that he serves his life to, they don't get him. So then after that happens, after Jesus talks and they say you have a demon, which is, if it's kind of translated funny, but it actually sort of means they're saying like, hey, you're just paranoid. Nobody's going to kill you, Jesus. And then Jesus gets into a debate about being accused about healing on the Sabbath. And then he talks a little bit about some other things. And I'm not trying to skip over this because it doesn't make my point. It's just some stuff that's not quite related to where I'm going with this verse. So if you want to ever read in, it's very fascinating stuff. And they even say, at the end of him kind of arguing with the authorities and the crowd even kind of says, well, you know, if another Messiah comes, will he do more signs than this or less? It's almost like they're kind of like, well, should we really believe that this is Jesus? Because maybe the next Messiah will do more signs for us. I don't know. And he avoids that time of arrest. And then we come to this verse that I was setting up for you. It's John 7:37 through 38. On the last day of the festival, day 8. So they spend 7 days with the water. And then on the last day, day 8, they sort of have a day of like reflection. Jesus was standing there again. He cries out, "Let anyone who is thirsty come to me. And let the one who believes in me drink. As the scripture has said, out of the believer's heart shall flow rivers of living water." You've probably heard some version of that verse before. And let me give you this Mirror Study Bible translation, verse 38. I hope you wrote this. You did. Good job, Lisa. In your realizing, this is Jesus, in your realizing that I am what the scriptures are all about, the whole Bible, you who have studied your whole life, you who have grown up with me, you who have sat across the table from me day after day after day. His brothers were at the festival, probably listening in. You, this crowd, that I did this huge miracle where I fed 20,000 people with bread that didn't exist. When you realize that I am what the scriptures are all about, you will discover uniquely for yourself, face to face with me, that you are what I am all about. And rivers of living water will gush out of your innermost being. This is the moment I think that Jesus makes his grand point in this whole series of situations, which is, I'm about you. And when you realize that I'm about you, that I'm all about you, and the whole Bible's about me, and the whole Bible's about getting to this point, not only will your needs, wants, circumstances sort of become no longer that important. Life, liberty, love, joy, peace, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, generosity, self-control will well up out of you like a fountain. Where you longed for those things to be all around you all the time, you will suddenly have the realization that they came or are coming from within you. That it isn't a situation where Jesus, have to come and fix your circumstances so that you feel all these things, that they will literally come up out of you. And all it takes is a recognition that his presence is what this is all about. Not the presence that you sometimes get to experience, the once in a great while, but the present presence that is with you 24/7, face to face, as close as you could ever be, in your midst, standing before you. I think my point today, if I have one, I think that God has put me on earth for other reasons, but one of the main reasons is to create a greater awareness of the present presence of Christ. I think when I say we, I generally do put myself in this. We're way diluted far too easily within the darkness of religion and legalism and deliverance, that those things are better than God's presence. I think our prayer life mistakenly emphasizes what God is going to do for us over the sweetness of being with him. And I think our time that we spend on earth reflects that. I think we struggle mightily to stop and make time for God. I think we struggle to put down things like fear and anxiety and anger and intentionally make room for the present presence of God in our lives. I think we get into really bad habits where we just keep busy and keep moving and aggressively working to make sure we have enough of everything we need. And I know that stuff is all very important, and I'm not trying to say that we should all just live as a monk and be with the presence of God in our homes and never leave, although that might be nice to do once every now and then. But I do think a lot of us are missing the present presence of Christ. I think a lot of us, and I don't mean to say, if you hear me say this, because I've been in darkness about this issue many times in my life. I'm not evil. I'm not in sin. I just didn't recognize how my fulfillment in life could come from the understanding of that present presence, that it would be like a river of living water flowing out of me. I think it's far too easy to just reorganize Father, reorganize our God. You've ever reorganized a room? And you kind of like find where everything is supposed to fit and everything needs to have a place? I think it's far too easy for us to reorganize God to a set of beliefs we're supposed to believe and forget that Christ's biggest point that he asks for is an obedience, not an obedience to a list of things, but an obedience to abiding. Christ asks us to obey in an abiding of him. You know what abiding is? Being with him. He stands before his own family and says, hey, I'm right here. Well, you should go there. He stands before crowds and says, I'm right here. What else he got? He even stands before his enemies, people that are out to kill him, and says, I'm right here. Hey, where are you from again? Who is your teacher? And he stands before all of us, not hidden behind a curtain, not somewhere up in the sky. He stands face to face, eye to eye, and says to you and to me, I'm right here. Within this abiding, we can find the true blessedness of Father's love. We will find the nature of Christ irresistible. We will see the work of Holy Spirit threaded throughout our lives. If you look in the Bible, there's a couple places where this idea of the river of flowing water, and because Jesus even says, if you realize what the scriptures said about the water, and there's a spot in Ezekiel where it talks about this vision that Ezekiel has where this river is flowing and life is growing, all types of plants and trees, and the river is filled with all types of fish, and it even goes to the point where it enters the Dead Sea, and it turns the Dead Sea, or not necessarily say the Dead Sea, but it turns a dead body of water from death to life. And then even at the end of the Bible in Revelation, John, the writer of this book, even mentions that the new Jerusalem that is made will have a river that goes up and down the middle of it, and it provides life to all. The whole Bible from start to finish is about the present presence of God, about the present presence of Father, embodied, tabernacled with us in Jesus. That we don't ever have to go to a tent. We don't ever have to pretend like we're camping to be in the present presence of God, that he is with us in the here and now. And my encouragement to you today, stop. Learn to stop. Learn to stop at the grocery store. Learn to stop in your home. Learn to stop in the car. Learn to stop at work. Learn to stop even at church. Learn to stop. Because I think the only way that we are going to be able to become more aware of the present presence is to stop. Because he's right in front of us. So if you're taking your life and you're measuring it up and going, man, I don't know where God is in here, he's right in front of you. Yeah, but look at the way my life is going right now. I get it. I get it. I would trade the present presence of God sometimes throughout my years for some of those things to be resolved too, for sure. A golden platter with everything I've ever dreamed handed to me, that'd be hard to resist. I get it. But what we're really looking for, what we really thirst for, what we really hunger for, what really satisfies, and what this whole life is about, is recognizing that what this is all about is Jesus. And what Jesus is all about is you. And when you and I realize that, out of the innermost being of who we are, will flow a water that satisfies everything you could ever imagine.